Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for the Shift Forward virtual conference. Hopefully you were able to catch our CEO, John Ryan's opening remarks. I'm really excited now to be with Credi, our strategic business partner, and we're going to talk through a little bit about the overlooked role that hardships play in leadership development. I'm Eric Ginsberg. I'm part of CCL's social media team, and I'll be facilitating this conversation and one of our other sessions later today as well. Emily mentioned this earlier, but just to reiterate, this session, like all of today's sessions, will be recorded. That recording will be available right here in the event afterwards. So if you need to jump off or step away for a minute, you can come back and catch all of Anne's great insights then. If you have questions throughout the session, we really encourage you to leave a comment, and we will be paying attention to those and do our best to answer any questions at the end as time allows. But with that, let's get started. Anne, thanks so much for being here today. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. And wow, what a privilege it is to be here today and to follow John Ryan. Wow. Hopefully I can live up to that. But yeah, so I'm a strategic business partner at CCL, which simply means that I work with a whole slew of global clients, from the Fortune 100, major sporting organizations, brands you would recognize, and colleges and universities. And what my work is at the center is that I work with those clients in order to create custom solutions along with our faculty and leadership solutions providers who are experts to really bring development alive within organizations and help elevate leaders, their capability, and help them realize their potential. I spent a 20-year career in publishing and advertising. I was a publisher for an educational organization, and we created content and experiences for large organizations to resonate with educators. And so really just, it's been a privilege to work at CCL for the last 5 years, which is like drinking from the leadership fountain. One of, I think the most, I feel like I'm in the right place at the right time, certainly with the global crisis and how we're all growing and developing from that. And so I found myself thinking a lot about hardships throughout this period of time, and I'm eager to talk about it today. I'm curious, Eric, in those early moments when, in March, when we started to see the sands shift beneath our feet, and we all started to experience a whole plethora of different emotions. I'm curious about you. How did you handle and navigate those early March days?
Yeah, I remember it well. I felt very overwhelmed. It felt like there was sort of an endless stream of not really being sure what exactly was safe and what was a good idea or how bad things would get. And initially, I focused on my fears for my own personal health and safety, and then started thinking about my loved ones. And over time, that transitioned to more of like an economic fear for myself, for the country, for the world.
Yeah.
But certainly a stressful and overwhelming time.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, I can identify completely. I would have said in February, I would have described myself as a high performer. I think it's fair to say that I'm known for getting things done. I work intensely. But in March, things started to feel off, and it seemed to get worse and worse. And I will forever remember, March 12th and 13th, when we started to realize we weren't going to go back to the office for 2 weeks, and what that meant, and trying to grapple with each piece of news that seemed to be more and more dire. And so I remember renegotiating with myself during this period of time, like, okay, well, this is terrible. But if something more terrible happens, then I won't be able to bear it. And then that terrible thing kind of did happen. And so it was, watching the states close down one by one. So what was interesting for me is so this high performer, this person that works intensely, by that Monday after March 13th, that infamous day, I felt utterly paralyzed. And I remember I was working, so I would react to emails, but it was this horrible toxic cadence of do a little work, look at the news, do a little work, obsess about what was happening and how it was going to affect me and the health of my loved ones. As you said, the economic repercussions, it all seemed to be just too much to bear. And I remember thinking about the irony about, who we are at CCL. And I know inherently that learning comes from experience. And I know that the tougher the experience, the more learning that we can extract from it. So I kept trying to self-coach and bring myself back, but the threat felt too great. So I emailed one of our extraordinary colleagues, Dr. Cindy McCauley. And Cindy is amazing because she is the resident and expert on experience-driven talent management, lessons of experience, and in fact was part of the original research team that developed the model, and we'll talk a little bit more about it later, 70-20-10. But HR professionals know this very well, and it's really a developmental model that helps us showcase where where learning can really come from. And that 70 is largely experience. So I was trying to figure out how to mine it, and I asked her, how if we were, going to approach this with a client, what would we tell the client? And at that moment in time, I really just needed it for myself. And I'll never forget her answer because I feel like it changed my mindset for at that moment. And I was able to finally connect in with something that I could do. And what she said is that there's a psychological difference between hardships and challenges. And it really comes from the stress literature. So when you're stressed, you can feel threatened. Stress can also make you feel challenged. But what was happening was that this unprecedented global crisis was making us feel threatened in a way in which transcended most of what many of us have experienced in our lives. And so that makes extracting the learning from it and getting back to being able to focus on challenges extremely difficult. And so first and foremost, her just acknowledging that quite plainly in the email, and then asking the provocative question of how can we help people move from feeling threatened to feeling challenged. And so we went on to have this really interesting conversation because at the end of the day, our ability as leaders, as organizations, as individuals, just helping other individuals and us helping our own selves, if we can redirect and focus on the challenge of things that we can start to be able to control in some measure versus feeling like things are careening out of control, what happens is that threat is still very much there, right? COVID doesn't go away. We're still afraid that we could get sick or our loved ones could, or we could lose people. That's how dire this is. But all of that starts to move into the background so that we can focus, and then we can start to make a difference for ourselves, and we can start to make a difference for other people. So what's really cool about that, innocuous email, that raising my hand, asking for help, and for her to share that perspective based on her expertise, all of a sudden it snapped me out and I got really excited. And the reason that I got excited was because she said to me in the email was that CCL was born for this moment. And all of a sudden I had a challenge that I could do something about, because I could start to talk about this with my colleagues and with my clients in a way where we could have conversations about how can we help people move that threat into the background and feel challenged. And so what is really cool about today and about being here with you right now, Ryan, is that email led to a whole lot of other emails that led to others within CCL saying, wow, this is really the center of our response and our ability to help. And so that fueled the white paper that many will get after attending this session about opportunity and crisis, and really has been kind of the centerpiece of today. So I think that's kind of neat.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Anne. That's a powerful story, and certainly important for us all to be able to make that mindset shift and see how we can actually turn a challenging time or hardship into an opportunity for growth. I want to get it a little bit more into that. And maybe to kick us off, we could talk about that original 70-20-10 model that you mentioned, and if you wouldn't mind just walking us through what that entails, and then I know later we'll address how hardship does play into this.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. So 70-20-10, many of you, of course, have heard of this, and this is, how the Lessons of Experience research started was a group of 20 organizations worked with CCL researchers. And really, they wanted kind of this framework of how could we help develop leaders within our organizations. And so the team went off and did interviews and quantitative and qualitative studies. And what they discovered is that a great deal amount of learning comes from, of course, on-the-job experiences, and then from other people, and of course, learning comes from learning journeys, virtual and in-person events like the ones that CCL creates all the time. What many people don't know, though, is that there is another story behind the 70-20-10 framework. And so what happened when, and if you wouldn't mind advancing to the next slide, I can show you a little bit about what's underneath the hood there.
Okay, please.
So here, Eric, are the real percentages. And so what you see is it's not quite as neat as 70-20-10. 5% actually come from personal life experiences, things like a major life event, a birth of a child, getting married. 5% is that formal coursework. And you'll see, other people and challenging assignments, but if you can focus on the 22% about hardships, the reason that this isn't the model and framework that we all work together with today is that when the researchers in the company started to look at how the data really shook out, what the organization said was, well, how are we going to manufacture in these developmental experiences that we want to create to challenge our leaders, personal life experiences and certainly hardships? And by the way, we wouldn't want to manufacture hardships.
Right.
And so they settled on, they did the math in the right way, and they settled on the 70-20-10 model. And yet hardships are where some of the most significant and profound and accelerated learning can actually happen. And so we've been talking about this. Jessica Glazier wrote a great article that's on the CCL website about this, and about how our lives, our personal lives and our work lives are starting to blend now more than ever. Mm-hmm. And that there is an opportunity for us to revisit the model and think about our personal life experiences and certainly hardships in the context of learning.
That makes a lot of sense. And when I think about it intuitively, I sort of think, of course we can learn and grow from the hardships that we experience. I want to talk more about what exactly that looks like, what kind of hardships we mean. And I know we're going to delve into that a little bit more as we go, in terms of what types of hardships we're referring to when we say that. I think we have a quote that speaks a little bit about this, but Anne, can you talk me through why hardships are significant here?
Yeah. Well, and thank you for bringing up the quote, because I love this. And when we're in a moment of hardship, we are, the colliding emotions that we're feeling can render us paralyzed, as I was sharing a little bit about my experience. And our opportunity to redirect ourselves onto the challenges really is practicing resilience in action. And when we think about resilience and we think about all of those things that contribute to us being more resilient, and if we can draw on those, what might they be? Being more mindful, right, in the moment. Because we can worry about a lot of things that are out of our control right now, but if we can bring ourselves back to that moment and the challenge at hand. Rumination, if we can help ourselves not obsess about those things and have the hamster wheel in our head just kind of going over and over again about that, that's a form of practicing resilience. Mm-hmm. And the learning knowing that we are navigating this hardship as best we can in those dark moments and in those light moments, and feeling empowered by that learning and how all those other challenges down the road, we got them because we're having had this experience, and that perspective of this experience is going to help us all really contribute to our ability to be resilient.
So, and what you're saying reminds me of some of the remarks that our CEO, John Ryan, made in the opening comments just before this about the role of vertical development and the power of it. How do you see that tying into what we're discussing?
Well, wow. First of all, vertical development, right? And so maybe John showed you, the glass. We're filling the glass full. It's not necessarily horizontal. And so, the hardship is a wonderful opportunity because it fits right in here into the vertical development model, where vertical development can be happening, where we can be deepening our ability to be strategic and introspective and to be effective. And so heat experiences, and heat experiences are experience that disrupt and kind of distort our reality and the way in which we do things. Can you think of a better heat experience than COVID, Eric?
Yeah, when we were discussing this before, you described COVID as the ultimate heat experience, and I have to agree with you there.
Yeah, and for anybody who is curious about a heat experience, think about stretch assignments or action learning projects, right? These are some of the things we manufacture when we're creating a leadership journey. We want to get at that 70. So what do is we create a whole collection of leadership development experiences, live events or in person, and then we're having people work on real life projects that there's a real risk that there can be failure, right? And so what we have to do in the context of those heat experiences is we have to make sure that we provide support so that people can feel like they can take risks and feel challenged. Well, the same thing goes for COVID, right? We don't have to manufacture an experience. We have an experience that all of us are facing at the same time. And by the way, we all play different roles in this experience. Sometimes we're helping and support others as they're feeling challenged and fearful of the risk in those experiences. And in other times, we're flipping our roles because it's not like anybody's got written the book on how to successfully navigate what we're going through.
Right.
The other image that you saw in terms of vertical development on that sheet is colliding perspectives. And this is, COVID, so often as leaders, we think we have to have all of the answers, right? Well, nobody has all of the answers on a normal day, and we certainly don't have them now. So it's the richness of mining those different perspectives and challenging our own assumptions and listening and learning from others as we navigate through, this really, really challenging environment that we're in. So, and then the elevated sense making. So this is where support comes in. Peer-to-peer, organization, leader to manager. Right now it can be happening up, down, and across the organization. And timeouts so that we can talk about, this is what we're experiencing, this is the challenge. What are we learning and what are we getting right? And what are we not getting right? Because I think John Ryan said was what made us successful before ain't gonna quite cut it right now. And so how are we challenging all of the things that we believed to be true? And how are we making sense of those with others?
That's powerful. Thank you, Anne. I see that we have two comments that I think really take us where we want to go in the conversation anyway. So I'm going to just pose them that came from the audience, sort of aligned with what I was thinking too. And I'll just read them both and you can answer them as you see fit. The first question from the audience is, how do we define hardship? And then the second, which I think is a related question, what's the difference between a stressful situation and a hardship?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And let me take that one, and then we can look a little bit about the different types of hardships. This is the distinction that Cindy pointed out brilliantly in the stress literature. So actually, you can feel stressed with hardships. It's that then you feel threatened within your hardship versus when you feel challenged in your hardship. So that's a little bit of the aha moment. And so when you feel threatened in your hardship, that's where you shut down. That's where you feel paralyzed. Mm-hmm. When you can move to the challenge, that's where you're still going to feel stressed, right? And you're still going to be working with yourself on lots of those resiliency techniques. But the more you redirect and you focus, that stress actually might start to feel more like pressure, which is different than stress, the pressure to perform, the pressure to do well, rather than kind of the toxicity of, the cortisol injection. Sometimes I say, I'm walking around and I feel like I have an IV of all of those bad chemicals that happen when you feel stressed. Well, how do we pull that IV out? And so that we can manage the challenge better. There's a slide, if we can pull that up, regarding the different types of hardships. And so take just a minute. And this, first of all, is not an exhaustive list. And secondly, there are all kinds of subsets of the big four, as I like to call them, that we created. But look at these for a second. We're experiencing all of these at once. When we think about personal trauma, loss of loved ones, illness, worried that we're going to be sick, discrimination and injustice. We haven't talked a lot about that. There's a wonderful session later today that's going to focus on inclusion. But what we know is that when people feel discriminated against in the workplace, that's a hardship. The research shows that they're experiencing the same pain that people are experiencing in these other different types of hardships. And so we want to be really cognizant of that as we are kind of walking through this world of a renewed sense of self-examination as we think about what our reaction needs to be to the horrific murder of George Floyd. Mistakes and failures. These are hardships that happen within organizations all the time. And so we'll talk a little bit about what organizations can do to help people navigate the mistakes and failures that have always been happening and are probably going to happen even more as people are trying new things and navigating in this world of ambiguity. And then, of course, career setbacks. And, think about all of the downsizing and the reorgs that are happening right now. And so the aftershocks of the hardship of COVID are with us today and are probably going to be with us for a long time. And so I think it really behooves us to really think about what these kinds of hardships mean and to reflect on some of the lessons that we've learned to this point, and maybe have a renewed sense of and how we are going to make the most of that learning and that connection with others in order to be able to navigate those through these aftershocks and beyond.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like in some ways we're experiencing sort of a perfect storm of these different hardships. Certainly, many of them were present previously to our current moment, aren't necessarily new, may be underlying, but have come to the fore. I can imagine with everything that's happening and the collision of these hardships that some of the folks tuning in might feel overwhelmed, which is sort of what you were talking about earlier, and certainly, something that we could relate to, at least to some extent. What can people do, or where's a good place for them to start if they're if they're facing colliding hardship here?
Right. That's an excellent question. So there's a lot of things we can do. And I think, one thing we have to acknowledge is that no one is now in the unique position of, and we said this earlier, of, as leaders, we want to be the sage on the stage. We want to be helpful. And yet we're in this same boat too. And so we're all, so step one is kind of acknowledging that you don't have all the answers. And two is that you will be playing dual roles in supporting others and asking for support yourself. So that's, I think, a good lesson. I'd love for you to bring up the next slide, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the lessons learned from hardships that I think will segue tactically into some specific things that we can do. And so, you know, I think a challenge that I'm issuing to all of you on the LinkedIn session today is to really think about, you know, kind of these four elements, and where you were pre-COVID and where you are now, and even maybe where you want to be. And so one of the things that the research shows, or four of the things I should say rather, is that this is a time of an explosion of compassion and sensitivity, because we are all in that same boat. So I've had some really interesting conversations with some, so I'll call them the hardened C-suite sometimes, not all C-suites. But you know those CEOs where it's, you know, it's the stock price, it's the EBITDA, it's the margin, and you know, they talk a little bit about the people strategy, but it may not feel like that in the culture of the organization because they're so numbers focused. Oftentimes they're technical experts, right? Brilliant people. Well, what a hardship does is that we're all in that same boat, proverbial boat, as I keep referring to it. And so what that means now is they're humbled by what's happening and their own feelings of, you know, lack of control and inability to know what the right answers are. So it's really learning about and embracing that compassion and sensitivity, and also it's to mine that. And so there are stories in our research when CEOs have experienced hardship, how they have, you know, things like life events like a heart attack, and how that helped redirect their mindset post that event happening in the context of way they looked at and operated within their organization. And because we know that empathy is, and the psychological safety and trust is the heart of really what runs high-performing organizations and their culture. Self-knowledge and perspective, you know, we talked a lot about, yeah, how many of us have felt like all the things we knew to be true, those things that we could hang our hat on, the way our companies operated, it's all in question now. And so we're going to have to let go of old ways of thinking and embrace new ways of thinking as we challenge our assumptions. So I think it's really an interesting exercise to think and reflect on that, and to capture some thoughts at this moment in time, and then maybe track some progress as you move through, you know, this next 12 months. Limits of control, we talked about that, right? You know, we like to control things, and at the end of the day, there's not much that we truly have the control that we think we have. And so COVID really has shifted the sands beneath us and brought that home. And flexibility, you know, as I think, flexibility can be an overused word. I was thinking a lot about VUCA. Everybody, you know, a lot of people have heard that about, you know, we're all in a VUCA world. It's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, it's ambiguous. Well, we hadn't seen anything, right? This has taken VUCA to a whole new level. And so what that means is that we have to be flexible and agile in the moment. And when we used to control things, and we used to know how the way things should be, and so that was the rigor in which we managed it, now we're changing strategies and practices. You know, are we going back to work? Aren't we going back to work in the moment? And so it's really thinking about that journey of our flexibility and pushing ourselves and stretching ourselves to be even more flexible and reactive. So, so any questions about that, Ryan? Because then I can maybe talk just a little bit about some specific things that HR leaders can do and managers can do, and we can even think about doing for ourselves.
We do have a couple questions that I want to ask, and I know we're coming up a little tight on time, but let's see how many we can fit in.
Okay.
So one of the questions that I see that you've spoken to some, but just want to give you a chance to address again. How can we see the role of hardships. We understand that it can be a powerful opportunity for development. But how can we turn those hardships into comebacks? The question doesn't specify, but I think you could take that as either as individuals or organizations.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first of all, it's going to rest with us and us, if we need it, asking for support with others. And we also have to have a little bit of we're going to have to take some risks, right? And so think of all of the challenging assignments that you have been given and that you have been asked to do. And it's, I mean, not even an assignment, it's the work now. Everything is a challenge because it seems like sometimes COVID presents us with a no-win situation. So we're choosing between what we believe is really the lesser of two evils. And so the more that we can focus on the challenges and the more that we can learn from the experience within the challenge and focus on the things that we're doing well, those are the things that I think are really going to shore us up. Those are the things that are going to give us the confidence that when we do fail, that we've got this. And so I think that kind of parlays nicely into, as we think about what organizations can do, what HR business partners can do, what managers can do for their leaders, for each other. And so when we talk about the challenges that we have at hand, and that there are no good answers sometimes, and that there is a high risk for failure in about a dozen different things a day. One is we can think about our organizations and creating a mistakes system. And so kind of looking at your organization before COVID, how did we treat mistakes? Were people afraid to surface those mistakes? Did we surface the mistakes and did we just talk about them? What went wrong? What went right? Did people feel like they were in trouble because of the mistakes that we made? Because the opportunity right now with COVID is crisis is the mother of innovation and invention. And so, we haven't even touched on the tip of the iceberg in terms of innovation and exciting, accelerated progress that businesses are making. I mean, even within CCL, I saw work that would have taken us 12 to 24 months to do, that literally, no joke, people did in a 4-week sprint. And it was marvelous and extraordinary. And the more people could focus on those hardship, or the challenge rather, the threat moved into the background. They felt like they had control, that they were making a difference. And so I think that's one of the mindset shift flips that can be really successful. But the organization has to have a tolerance and a way to talk about mistakes so it feels like there's constant learning that's happening. The other thing that people need to be able to do is really step in and help. And so when you do see somebody struggling, and they might be fine on Wednesday, but on Thursday they're not being afraid to kind of move in and take action to help provide that support, with the understanding that you too are feeling and having those same experiences, so that you're going to want to ask for help as much as you give help. And think about how that will multiply in the context of your culture in creating trust and psychological safety. When people feel like they're buried in a system and they're crying uncle and they can't raise their hand and say, I need help, or I'm afraid because I see this is going sideways and I don't know who to tell, or I just made a mistake because I have all of these different pressures on me now and I just missed that. And so if we can kind of step in and help and support each other, that will go a long way. Another thing we can do is think about coaching within your organization. Where are you? Have you thought about developing internal coaches? Do you have access to those internal coaches? If you have thought about a coaching culture within your organization, where are you on that continuum? And how can you help mobilize people internally? And how can you get them the capability that they need fast in a way where they're better equipped to have the kinds of conversations to help people navigate through the change and the disruption and the ambiguity and the challenges that they're facing? And the final piece that I'll say, which will be, I think, a wonderful teaser for the next event, is that I'm going to bring up my friend Cindy McCauley again. And we call her the mother of one of CCL's most, I think, extraordinary gifts to the leadership community, and that's direction, alignment, and commitment. And what that is CCL's definition of rather not what leadership is, but what does good leadership looks like? What does it look like? And it's a collective and social process of creating direction. Are we all working in service of that common goal? Alignment, aligning our people and our processes and engaging that commitment. And so as an organization, if we can get a handle on direction, alignment, commitment, not just at the organizational level, but at the function level and the team level, and we can really be using that as a diagnostic to, during this time and this period of crisis, to recalibrate do we have DAC, as we like to call it? And if we don't, where are we failing? Yeah. And then what do we do about it? And so those are a few of the things that I would share that we can start thinking about today.
Well, Anne, that's really powerful, and I certainly appreciate you teeing up the next presentation. I think our panelists will appreciate that as well, because that's a great segue, because it really does. That's why we set it up this way. I think it ties well together. So thank you for sharing that and all the other insights you've shared. I do see that we have more questions that we unfortunately don't have time for, but feel free to continue sharing those, and we will do our best to come back to those later. The recording of this video will still be available after this session ends and after today, if you want to come back and revisit some of the things that Anne said. I know there were a couple questions about, could you repeat this or that? So you'll be able to review that, and we'll do our best to jump in and answer some of those questions that we didn't have time for today. We have just a few minutes until the next session on direction, alignment, commitment that Anne mentioned. That will begin at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So just a couple minutes now if you need to take a break. If you haven't yet, I would just encourage you to use the Get Tickets link that's at the top of this events page, and that will from there you'll be able to download our conference materials, and we'll also then be able to follow up with you afterwards and send you more information. So you'll be able to see things like the article by our colleague Jessica Glazier that goes into this in more detail that Anne mentioned earlier in this conversation, as well as a lot of other additional materials that really speak to this point. But Anne, thank you so much for taking the time. I found this really valuable. I see in the comments that our audience did as well. So just very grateful for you walking us through this.
Oh, you're welcome. And let me leave you with one last thought, because I did see one last question, and it was, why are mistakes hardships? And so I'll leave you with this. They don't have to be if you get your organizational culture right. If I make a mistake, I might be freaked out because I'm afraid, and that's a hardship. And so as you think about creating a culture of psychological safety and trust, whether you had it to begin with or you want to start now, that's I think a nice point of reflection. So hopefully that's helpful. Eric, it's been a pleasure today. I wish you all well and peace as we navigate this, and we got it. We really do.
Thank you so much, Anne. I really appreciate it and grateful for your insights. For those of you in the audience, just a reminder that all of these sessions will be separate videos. So this live stream is going to end. We'll have a brief break where you won't see any new content as we just gear up for our next presentation. So hang in there with us, and then we'll start a new live stream where you'll be able to see that conversation at 10:30 a.m. Discussing direction, alignment, and commitment. So thanks again, Anne, and I'll see you all later today.
Bye.